Hi everyone. Thank you guys so much for inviting me to participate. So I know a couple people in the audience. So my name is Samantha Ho Kriegel. I'm the Vice President of Development and Communications for an organization called Teach for China. And what we do is we serve low-income schools in mainland China. We recruit top graduates, mostly from China, from places that you would have heard of, Beida, Fudan, Tsinghua, etc., but also from the US. And we recruit and place these graduates as teachers in low-income public schools. We teach middle school and upper primary, so about from roughly grade 3 to grade 9, which is the end of compulsory education in China. We teach core curriculum subjects, and our goal is to help our kids do better in school. We believe that education, I got to hear a little bit of the last panel, and I think there's a lot of people in this room that are interested in creating impact, right, and creating change. And Teach for China started because we believe education is the key to all change. And that with better education, that is the only way to systemically address issues of poverty, equity, civil society, etc. So we have today about 300 teachers in over 80 schools in Yunnan and Guangdong. We are pretty young, we're 5 years old. Our long-term vision is that not only will our teachers serve for 2 years and help kids right now today as teachers, but we aspire to the same model that our sister organization Teach for America, which some of you might have heard of, or Teach First in the UK does, which is that after 2 years of teaching, almost all of our fellows, our teachers, stay in the education or the NGO space. Some of them don't. Some of them go on to business schools. Some of them go on to private sector careers. But our goal is to help create a movement of lifelong leaders in education. So that's a little bit about Teach for China.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jasmine, and this is Connie, and we're the co-founders of Philanthropy in Motion, PIM for short. So we basically call ourselves a young people's foundation because we think that young people could make a great difference. And just to give you a little bit context about the problem that we address, so in China, the philanthropic sector is relatively young. And I'd like to direct you to this chart here, which shows the trend of charitable giving in China. And you see that it's been increasing by a huge amount, with spikes in 2008 and 2010. Can anyone guess why there were spikes in charitable giving then? What are some major effects? Actually, the earthquake. Yeah, so the earthquake in 2008 and 2010, there was a huge increase in giving because a lot of corporations and individuals all felt compelled to give to help their country. However, even though this trend is very positive, if you look at statistics showing the overall level, the big picture of giving in China, there is this index called the World Giving Index that rates countries based on their giving on 3 criteria: giving money, giving time, so volunteering, and helping strangers on the street. Out of 135 countries surveyed, China ranked 133. So in the very, very bottom. And you might say, oh, because China is a developing country. But if you compare to India, which is also a developing country with lower GDP per capita, India is 97. Not much better, but at least they have a higher rate of giving to NGOs. And also, just for reference, Hong Kong is number 17 on the list. Hong Kong people are very good at giving money, but very terrible at giving their time. So I'm very impressed a lot of you guys showed up today because time is very precious in Hong Kong. And the first one, can anyone guess which one's the first in terms of charitable giving? The United States. Yes, and so what are some of the reasons why charitable giving is so low in China? Some ideas, people have attributed it to low public understanding of the nonprofit sector, low level of trust. Some recent charity scandals, for example, the Red Cross, has really had a huge impact on people's belief in these organizations. And a lot of times they think that there's a lot of corruption rampant in these big organizations. And these big organizations are the ones that people really think about, but a lot of times in China, like the work is done by small and medium organizations that get very little publicity. So overall, this has created a philanthropic system that is lagging behind. And I also want to show you this 2 pie charts that shows the percentage of giving that comes from corporations and individuals. And in China, the majority of giving, 57%, come from corporations. Individuals is only 32%. Whereas if you look at the United States, over 70% comes from the individuals. And what we think is that as China's purchasing power grows and economic clout grows, more and more individuals want to give back to their society, and they also want to make a decision about how their money is used. So instead of having the corporation make the decision for them, they want to conduct the due diligence themselves. They want to identify good organizations, which is why we come in.
And so just to very quickly go over what we do, we essentially partner with local and international foundations as well as academic institutions such as the University of Hong Kong to provide a platform in which young people can really investigate the NGO landscape in China, come up with a strategy on how to best allocate resources to support these organizations, form networks, build a community, in order to maintain momentum for the causes that people care about, and practice really learn through practicing, and most importantly really to inspire and motivate young people to think that they can make a difference, and in return after receiving our education to act as role models to further inspire their peers.
Ming and I have been working to establish this group called Ginseng. We're essentially a platform for learning about impact investing. Now this is a very broad, impact investing in general is a very broad topic, right? It spans all the way from like public equities, social impact bonds, all the way over to earlier stage kind of private equity style, venture capital, early stage, seed. Looking at where we've been so far, and potentially ginseng could play a role across that entire spectrum, I would imagine, but at the point where we are in Hong Kong right now, with the evolution of the social enterprise environment and the impact investing environment, we're focusing right now on the earlier stage, so kind of seed, venture, and also due to the size of our fund right now, we're kind of staying away from the growth, and not that there's that many growth opportunities really to invest in Hong Kong.
Thank you guys. So the reason why I brought this panel together is because we have a lot of very interesting models in this panel about how to get involved. Teach for China requires a lot of commitment because it's a 2-year program in the rural area in China. And Ginseng requires more financial commitment because they're asking you for money. And PIM has a different model, and they were basically asking students to get more involved in the process without spending too much money or too much of their time or the entire career. So I guess the first question I want to ask is how do you see your model? Like, why do you think your model works?
What I said before, though, is I think important to keep in mind. We're actually looking for people in whom that 2-year experience is us investing in them. As you guys know, if you start looking at NGOs in China, China is a very, very difficult place to operate in. Either as a for-profit, so my previous life, I used to work for McKinsey, it's really hard to run a business in China. I know many people know that. It's really, really hard to run an NGO in China. So we are trying to take people who we think are incredibly bright, incredibly passionate, and say spend 2 years doing good, but also spend 2 years learning how to operate in that environment. So that's one comment I would have, is that what we're trying to do is we're trying to provide service directly, but we're also trying to create a movement of young people who will go on in many ways that we probably can't even predict, to start their own organizations, some of which might be definitely on this spectrum of social enterprise in terms of having an income model, some of which will not have an income model. I mean, we're a straight up charity. You know, we don't have an income model, and it would be, I still believe that there is, perhaps it is not, it's probably controversial for me to say so in this room when we're talking about impact investing. I still think that there are certain areas in the charitable world that do not lend themselves to being social enterprises because they are fundamentally things that don't work, that don't have an income model. I happen to think education is one of them. However, we at Teach for China also recognize that education as a space is a huge business in China. And so we're eager to have people that can potentially build organizations that sit in that middle part of that space, that could have income models, that could benefit the communities that we serve. So I guess this is my very long answer saying Teach for China is looking for a 2-year commitment, but we're actually looking for a long-term, lifetime commitment from our people. That being said, there are other ways that you can support us, but yes, we're a service organization.
Yeah, so for PIM, we're also looking for people who want to be lifelong givers. We just start early. We attract students, we attract young professionals, and we provide this education program for them to learn how to evaluate different organizations, including social enterprises, but also traditional nonprofits and charities. And the way we do it is that we actually provide them with a fund, because we know that a lot of young people, at least at this age, their financial resources are limited. So what we do is that we want to leverage a collective giving, so have everyone contribute together, as well as match them with our own resources. That way we create like a bigger pool of funding, and that they could have a more, instead of giving $100, 100 Hong Kong dollars, they could be giving somewhat like $150,000 Hong Kong dollars, which for a nonprofit or a social enterprise makes a lot more difference. So our education model is just this beginning. What we're trying to do is also to create a community for people to support each other and continue to give collectively as a whole. And the reason why we think collective giving is one of the most rewarding ways of giving is that you learn from each other.
We're not that expensive, I guess. Compared to 2 years of your life, I'm not sure most of you in this room make a lot more than what we require of you. Although you may find once you get started, you enjoy it so much that you spend your whole life on it. So our model is essentially pretty simple. We believe in learning by doing. So this whole idea of learning about impact investing, we want you to really apply it. So we have a fund. Basically, when you join, you put 10,000 Hong Kong dollars into the fund, and then you pay $2,000 a year to help cover the administrative overhead of running the organization. And then essentially, you engage in actually sourcing deals, talking to entrepreneurs, and through that process, you try to get the company or the SE to an investable level. Once it's at an investable level, then we're still kind of working on the structure, how we actually physically do this in ginseng, but there will be some investment committee that would consider that investment and potentially deploy capital into that investment. This is pretty invaluable experience, I think, for young people, where it's often hard, in a corporate environment or in a private equity environment to get your hands that much on a deal.
So I guess this question is more for Teach for China and PIM. So you guys talked about long-term lifetime investment or commitment in this area. So how exactly do you do that? So how do you expect, say, a Teach for China fellow after 2 years of teaching in a village in China, how do you expect them to continue support and commit to either Teach for China or education field in general? Are there any specific ways you guys are doing it?
So let me answer that question in 2 parts. The first part I think is just what our vision is for our alumni. So our hope and our aspiration is that after 2 years in these classrooms, that our alumni will have a first-hand experience of what the challenges are that these communities face, what the challenges are that the children face, the challenges are that the schools themselves face, and that they will then be inspired to continue advocating, right, for change. During the course of the 2-year fellowship, we provide a lot of training and support. And actually, if you looked at our cost structure, most of our costs are actually around recruiting and then training our fellows. Our fellows actually make the same amount of money as any public school teacher in China, meaning almost nothing. I mean, the average public school teacher in China makes less than 2,000 renminbi a month. So some of that training obviously is strictly pedagogical. It's teaching them how to be teachers, right? Because that's what we do. But we also spend a lot of time trying to teach them how to be leaders. And more actually, we are trying to teach them how to be strong entrepreneurial leaders, because we see the opportunity in China to build, as the NGO sector in China opens up and expands and the government creates more space for NGOs to operate, we see there being a huge opportunity for people to start social enterprises and NGOs. So we do that. We have mentor programs, we provide different training programs throughout the fellowship, and then we continue to do that. We have an alumni impact team that works with our alumni. Part of that is just social networking and creating a community, because I agree very much, having a community is the best way to learn, and so people learn from each other, and we share best practices, we share experiences. But we are also, as we go further down this journey, we're becoming more systematic in terms of trying to have structured programming for our alumni. So that's the way that we try to approach it.
You're saying that you, for Teach for China, you probably are still figuring out what is the model for people to get long-term involvement in this area. So as far as I know, the first batch of your teachers have already graduated from this program. Yeah. So can you give us some specific example of what the teachers are doing right now? And
so we're in our 5th year, so we have our 5th class of fellows in the field right now. We have about 150 alums today. As of June, that number will go up to about 300. So our N is still very small, but the current core of alumni, about a large number of our alumni stay in education. So about 30 to 40% stay in education. So that might be continuing on as teachers. Most of them, quite frankly, don't stay necessarily in rural areas because they just can't make enough money to live. But they continue on, and many of them have aspirations to start their own schools. About another third of our alumni go on to graduate school, and there's a huge variance there. Like I said, we have some in business school, we have some in education school, we have some in public policy. You have to understand that we're recruiting people right out of college, right? So these are people who are with us basically from the age of 21 to 23, 24. And then we have, what does that leave us? About 20, 25, 30% they go in and they go into the private sector and work. Again, there is a huge variation. So we are very excited because last year we had 2 firsts. We had our first alum who went to work for Goldman Sachs. That was very exciting. And then we had our first alum who actually was hired by the Yunnan Provincial Education Bureau, the same bureau who initially actually didn't want Teach for China in their schools, now has an alum. So, our vision is that I say to people, look, I would be unhappy if none of our alums stayed as teachers, but I also would be not happy if all of our alums stayed as teachers, because the reality is, as with most of these big problems that we all want to work against, education is incredibly complicated. It will require input from across all sectors, right? So we're looking to launch people on what we call high impact pathways, and we believe those pathways include government. In China, that's unavoidable. Includes, in the education sector itself, public and private, and also includes private sector, corporate support. Maybe that means people are going to become philanthropists. Maybe that means they're going to start an ed tech company, which can create technology that will improve access, to quality instruction in rural parts of China. So that's a little bit of a picture of what they're doing now.
The 3 organizations have in common is you all work with relatively young generation, work with students or young professionals. During your experience, do you feel that the young generation in China or Hong Kong are getting more and more aware of the social problems in China? Are they aware that they can be part of the solution, not just an audience? Do you think the social values and the university education in China are generally supportive of people, getting more involved in this field?
We obviously, Teach for China has a lot of experience and perspectives on this because we recruit people directly from mainland China. And I have to say, when I first met Teach for China, one of the questions that I asked our CEO that I was most skeptical about, frankly, was how will you find young mainland Chinese graduating from these universities that want to go and spend 2 years making no money, living in really difficult conditions? Again, in my previous life, and I think probably a lot of you similar background, working for McKinsey or working for a bank, I know that there are many, many extremely bright and capable mainland Chinese, but I had not myself met very many who were interested in doing service. I would say, actually, I've been pleasantly surprised. Again, when we're recruiting at Beida, we're trying to recruit the same people that McKinsey recruits or that Goldman recruits. We're looking for exactly the same qualities. And for example, I don't have the numbers for this year, but last year we received 3,000 applications. I think that there is a cultural shift going on in the mainland where people are much more aware of these social problems so that there is an opportunity for them to play a role, whether that be as a philanthropist or in terms of directly providing service. But I would also say, again, this is from the perspective of an organization trying to run a service program, there remain some structural barriers. So I'll give you an example. The Chinese government gives incentives to employers to employ new college graduates. This is part of what they do to kind of try to maintain high levels of employment. Our fellows, in some cases, because they are not fresh graduates, so even though they're just 2 years out of college and they haven't had a real paying private sector job, are actually on some campuses banned from participating in on-campus recruiting. If you look at Teach for America, I'll give you guys a great statistic, which would inspire us all. So today, when I graduated from college around the time that Teach for America started, I'm much older than everyone in this room, so that was like 20 plus years ago. When I graduated from Harvard, almost no one applied to Teach for America. Like, you knew about it, you knew it was a good thing, no one applied. Today, about 20% of the class, graduating class at Harvard, applies to Teach for America. And the reason they do is because they realize that it's a selective program, they realize it's a way they can give back, but it's also a way that they can continue to learn, and it will be a credential for them. So it's a win-win. We have hopes that that will happen in China as well.
Yeah, I think this is a global trend, actually, that the newer generations coming up are more and more engaged in solving problems that they see around them in the world. And you could speculate probably on a lot of different causes for that. Practically speaking, if you can't get a job, you'll be more creative in how you deploy your most precious resource, your time. I also think, economic productivity growth is happening around the world. Manufacturing productivity is going off the charts. We don't need people doing as much manufacturing. So more and more people are engaged in service industries. But how much time can you spend cutting hair and doing basic services? And so at some point, you also want and you also have more leisure time because you're able to generate more output with your time because you have a computer now and you have internet access and all these things. With the internet, you're also exposed to more of the issues of the world. You're getting a more global perspective. You're getting more mechanisms through which you can kind of connect with other people around issues and start to try to come up with solutions.
I just want to add a point about universities being also very experimental with philanthropy and with social innovation now. In the U.S., that's been a trend, and a lot of, for example, at Yale, there's a philanthropy course where students got $100,000 US to invest in social organizations. And that's actually not just, that's funded by a foundation called Once Upon a Time Foundation that funds 20 different universities to do these types of courses. And here in China and in Hong Kong, there are more and more schools that are also interested in engaging students in doing these types of work. We'll see it more as an extracurricular activity, but not so much as something that would spill over into their careers later on. And that's what we also really think should change in the future in terms of what Teach for China has done and other groups is really providing professional opportunities for people to consider careers that have social impact without completely sacrificing their financial independence. Because the statistics are really terrible. For most nonprofits in China, the average wage is 2,000 to 3,000 RMB, and these are university or master's students.
I mean, I think that's a really, really relevant point. And that's something where I know from our perspective, I think one of the challenges we have is talking to philanthropists or would-be philanthropists in the mainland who don't understand that point, who don't understand the sustainability of encouraging people to do this as a career, as a life choice. Most of the schools that we serve, they cannot attract college graduates to be teachers. So most of the schools that we go to, middle schools, the middle school kids are being taught by teachers who have basically graduated from middle school themselves and then done a one-year vocational training. It's the very minimal requirement, but it's because they can't attract anybody else.
An interesting observation. So all the panelists today are either born in the United States or educated in the United States. So apparently the U.S. does have a much better culture or education in terms of giving and doing services for good. So I guess this is not a question, it's a comment. So I guess China has a lot to catch up, not just the kind of support from the university, but I guess in terms of culture thing, like we need to try to advocate a culture of giving. Yeah, like I believe it's not going to be done in a few years. It requires generations of effort, but I do hope one day we will see China active in this field as well. You have any?
Well, I wouldn't say I wouldn't put a relative, better or worse on it. Honestly, I think it's different approaches to how things. And you mentioned Europe a bit, and that's an interesting observation because in Europe you tend to see a belief in government and higher taxes, and then let the government kind of. And so there may not be the same desire among the people to be philanthropic because a lot of the basic needs are being taken care of by redistribution of wealth through taxation. The U.S. takes a very different approach and always has, and is relatively anti-government, especially in the early days. It's kind of gone a different direction now. So I think that's a philosophical difference, but to your point, I do feel that China's probably, that's actually better for the panelists in terms of where China was and where it's going to, but it seems to be heading more towards the autonomous self type concept of less communist and more towards capitalist.
Thank you again for coming. I was pleasantly surprised with the turnout of this forum, and then the fact that many people actually came from mainland China to Hong Kong for that forum. So I guess there are a lot of hopes in China in terms of yeah. So thank you again, and I hope you enjoyed it. And let's move up.